Welcome to Tales from the Old New Republic. This is part 2 of our discussion on Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, we highly recommend you start there.
When Card finds out Han and Lando are on their way, he locks Luke and R2 in separate warehouses away from the main facility. This doesn't last long, though, as Luke is able to override the locks in the doors using the power supply in his prosthetic hand. While Card hosts Han and Lando, they're interrupted by the arrival of Thrawn, who wants to collect more Ysalamiri. As Card prepares to hide Han and Lando, Luke steals a ship and flees the camp. Mara pursues, and the two crash in the surrounding forest. Card makes up a story about a disgruntled employee to explain the commotion, but a skeptical Thrawn insists on sending a team to help in the rescue effort. Luke and Mara flee the crash site before the Imperials reach them and start the 3-day journey out of the forest. Han and Lando recognize the power cell from Luke's hand and deduce he was the captive. They agree to work with Card to save Luke and Mara. Thrawn speculates that Luke may have been the prisoner and leaves ground forces to ambush the exit of the forest before he departs the planet. Luke and Mara are able to communicate with Card by having R2 send and receive encoded messages with Luke's X-Wing, and are warned of the ambush. After days of pestering Mara about why she has a grudge against him, she reveals to Luke that she was the Emperor's Hand, a Force-powered agent who executed his agenda throughout the galaxy. When the two finally reach the edge of the forest, they're able to coordinate with Han, Lando, and the rest of Card's forces and wipe out the Imperials. Card plans to abandon Merkur while Luke leaves with Lando and Han, who are heading back from Coruscant after hearing from Leia that she has temporarily solved the Noghri issue and is also heading home. They decide to go to the New Republic military base and shipyard on Sluis Van, first for medical treatment for Lando, who is injured in the battle, and to repair Luke's disabled X-Wing.
All right, so all these various fetch quests that Luke and Han have been on have been able to move everybody to Merkur now, along with Card and Thrawn. And we get the situation where Card is having to move pieces around to try not to make Thrawn mad or the New Republic mad. So he's sort of in a sitcom asks two girls to the dance at the same time, where he keeps running back and forth and trying not to let the two know about each other. So first we have Luke moved into the storeroom. Han and Lando just have dinner with Card and his crew, and we get introduced to Ghent, who is the Slicer, the whole reason that Han and Lando started this whole journey. And Ghent is your sort of stereotypical 90s hacker nerd that, isn't very socially aware, doesn't even really understand what's going on, just likes his numbers and computers. And he's actually the one eventually that lets slip to Han and Lando that Thrawn is a Grand Admiral, though he doesn't actually know what his name is.
So were slicers a thing before this book? Is this a concept that we know about?
I have to imagine it's a West End game thing, that's like one of the
I guess
classes,
but it definitely wasn't in the movies, right? There's no concept, because I'm trying to think, the concept of a movie hacker didn't exist in the 70s and 80s, right? This is a modern interpretation of a hacker.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when was War Games?
Late 80s, maybe?
Was that the 80s?
Early 90s? I guess, there was phone freaking and stuff, but
Jurassic Park was 93? When
maybe
the 10-year-old girl was a hacker
using a Unix
punk
operating system. Yeah. It's just funny to see modern trends work their way in, because I think now it's you hear Slicer in Star Wars media and it's just that's just a thing that Star Wars has had forever, but it's something that probably wouldn't have worked in the 80s or 70s. I don't know. I'm just finding it
funny. I mean, they're still talking about data tapes in A New Hope with the Death Star plans.
Right.
It's very very rudimentary computer knowledge. So yeah, while they're at dinner, they're interrupted by Thrawn, who arrives at the planet looking for more Ysalamiri, and he also asks Card about acquiring warships. And when he does this, Card freezes up for a split second before brushing him off. Mara does pick up on this. It's unclear whether Thrawn noticed, but he probably did, because Thrawn notices everything. This won't be addressed in this book, but it does become an important plot point going forward.
See, I read that part and I don't remember that at all. I mean, I didn't pick up on it either. So, I mean,
Yeah, he just kind of stutters for a second and then plays it off. And Mara's like, I noticed, but it would have been very difficult for anybody else too, because she's a, super spy that
Right.
knows all this stuff.
Yeah, so Thrawn shows up with a group of stormtroopers, and this part of the book they focus a lot on imperial formations and military etiquette. And it's not just the emperor's personal guard that had that discipline. They kind of imply that stormtroopers are this like elite force that are highly disciplined, very focused on the job. And I think even now the relationship between stormtroopers and rank and file Imperial Army is not really clear, but especially back then, I mean, all we had seen was the movies. There's like one or two Imperial soldiers that aren't wearing stormtrooper armor, and I think the implication is that they're part of a separate branch of the military that is like just like normal soldiers. And I looked a little into this. In the source book, it's pretty clear. They make a pretty firm distinction between stormtroopers as sort of like shock trooper. They're stormtroopers. And then the Imperial Army is just the people that sort of run the day-to-day of managing an empire. But, that you wouldn't know it from the plethora of TV shows and games and things that have come out since then, where basically the only enemy you see are stormtroopers, right? So I found that kind of interesting that they, in this book, started that trend of, oh, there's stormtroopers and then there's just like other stuff. And that never really followed through, and I don't really know why, because I like that concept.
Well, so it did follow through if you saw the Solo prequel,
Right?
because Han joins the Empire for a bit and is just part of the normal like ground forces, not even stormtrooper level.
Right. Those are the ones in the sort of grayish greenish armor.
Yeah, and other than that, yeah, I don't think that really comes up in a lot of media. It's always stormtroopers. I mean, I think part of it is that you have the stereotype that stormtroopers are kind of incompetent. They have terrible aim. They screw up everything all the time. Even though the only time, well, okay, there's twice that's true. There's one during
Ewoks.
there's the Death Star escape, which they let, even in the movie, Leia says they let us escape.
Right.
And then there is the Ewok battle, which they get defeated by a bunch of teddy bears. But you look at the opening of A New Hope when they're boarding Leia's ship and just mowing down the rebels there. You look at on Hoth, they have their ground assault. They storm the base. In those times they're extremely well trained and well disciplined. But because of those other instances, it's kind of just they're just a running joke. Like on the Mandalorian, Bill Burr's character is saying he wasn't a stormtrooper. He's actually able to hit stuff.
Right.
And
yeah, they have the whole scene where the two scout troopers are like shooting at a rock and they can't hit it. Yeah, it's silly because, I mean, I don't know. I get it. When you watch the movie, that is certainly the feeling, but like that's because it was actors in heavy plastic armor where they can't see anything. Like that's a function of just the movie kind of being difficult in production. If you watch,
not being that high budget a movie in like the 70s.
Yeah. Like when you watch the Attack of the Clones specifically and Revenge of the Sith, and it's all mocapped and they don't have their vision obscured. They're not weighed down by clunky armor. It's like a guy on a blue screen. Then they look way more efficient and competent, right? And that's kind of what it's supposed to have always been like, I feel. I don't think we need a canon explanation for why the guy hits his head on the door when he walks through it on A New Hope, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just a production error. So yeah, and I much prefer the idea that stormtroopers are actually competent and like scary to fight, because otherwise it's just boring.
Yeah, so Thrawn then comes in. Card goes to the lengths of clearing the dinner table because he thinks Thrawn might somehow know how many people were at the base or were in that particular room, and Han and Lando there would somehow get found out because the like dinner place settings would give them away or something. But he is sort of being set up as a foil for Thrawn here, where he's maybe not quite to the level of a tactician, but he is making sort of similar moves all throughout these scenes where he's trying to cover for Luke and Mara crashing, coming up with quick explanations, trying to not have Thrawn send stormtroopers into the forest. He keeps going, "Oh no, we'll handle it. It's our people. We wouldn't want you to be troubled." And Thrawn, sensing something up, says, "Oh well, what sort of guest would I be if I didn't help you? Search for your important team members." And it's nice to have sort of rivals for Thrawn. I think we'll see a few different ones over the course of this trilogy, but he's not just this super genius that sort of steamrolls over everybody with plans. Like, there are people that can at least match him in different situations.
Yeah, Card has street smarts more than raw intellect, right? Like, which is a good enough defense against Thrawn's like overwhelming intelligence. Yeah, I love that this book does a really good job of conveying sort of the subtext of their language to each other, that they kind of both know they're playing a game, but no one will come right out and say it. And as the book goes on, it develops and it becomes more hostile. But
it could even be seen as like a flaw from Thrawn's perspective, that he wants to win the game of wits rather than just win this, because like he pretty much, Vader would have just killed everybody and that would have been the end of it.
Right.
And that would have been like the correct play here. But because Thrawn views everything as a chess match, he doesn't just want to like accidentally, I mean, I guess he views Card as sort of an ally, but in the grand scheme of things, like, who cares? He's just a smuggler.
Yeah. I mean, I think he does recognize the value that Card has in the sort of underworld at large, but yeah, it's like the consequence of not just wiping all of them out is that if they turn on him, they're equally as powerful in the opposite direction. Like, now they're this whole smuggling network that could assist the rebellion. So yeah, I agree. I do like that, though, that he's not like, he's too smart for his own good, and he likes to win, and sometimes overanalyzes things where it's like, well, I don't want to discard any options yet. And it's like, yeah, he's clearly tricking you, but you want that extra 1% guarantee that he is before you make a move. Like,
all right.
Yeah. So Luke and Mara leave the crash site before the Imperials appear, and they head towards the nearest town, which is 3 days away, and they're traipsing through the jungle. One line that stood out to me is they describe Luke as wearing the same black outfit that he wore on Tatooine on the sail barge, at Jabba's palace, and then when he was going to get thrown into the Sarlacc pit. This bothers me so much. Out of everything else in the book, I think this one line is such a head scratcher, because it sets this precedent that Luke has not developed at all as a character. And like, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it feels to me like a lot of the kinds of expanded media that came after that depict Luke Skywalker were so afraid to alter the image of what Luke was. If I can be a little, go off the rails of it here, like, I don't like The Last Jedi as a movie, but I do really like the outfit that Luke wears, because it's great. Like, it's such a simple thing, but like, Luke wearing black in Return of the Jedi is because they very explicitly wanted the audience to recognize that he's becoming more like Darth Vader. But at the end of the movie, he redeems himself, he redeems his father. He's not this like nebulous dark Jedi anymore, or trending towards being dark. And so having like a lighter or a gray or a brown outfit would have characterized that more, but instead they're like, nope, he's still, really close to the dark side. Maybe that's intentional, but I don't think it is. I think it's more a product of trying to capture the last image that we saw of him in theaters, which is this black outfit that he wears through the whole movie.
Yeah, this does sort of ring as a like Saturday morning cartoon thing that used to happen, where they would, it even happens in anything that's sort of animated, that you just have the one character sheet that they always wear the same
Bart
outfit, because
Simpson.
it's like, yeah, because that's what he had in the movie as a Jedi. That's just like the default outfit for him to wear, because it's like recognizable from the movie. But the thing is, it's a book, like,
right? You can write it to be whatever you
consequence. Yeah, I do think that maybe part of it is because it's revealed that Mara was at Jabba's palace, to just like make her more resentful or more angry. Like, he's wearing the same outfit and like it looks like the same person.
Yeah, that's a fair
But
point.
I don't think it's really that necessary. Like, there's plenty. I don't think it really adds anything.
Yeah, he
to
still
have him
looks like
wearing
him.
the same thing.
You could
Yeah.
say, oh, he has his lightsaber, and she recognized the lightsaber from when it shot out of R2 or something. Yeah. Yeah, it's a small thing, but I just really appreciate it in the original trilogy. Like, Luke goes from wearing a plain white tunic in the first movie, then he's got the like gray jumpsuit in the second movie, and then finally it's black, and like there's a clear progression. And at least from interviews, it seems like it was intentional. So anyway, it just bugged me, but we can stop talking about this. It's gone on long enough.
Yeah, so basically from the first little meet cute that Luke and Mara have, the back and forth is Luke trying to be helpful or trying to be friendly, and then Mara threatens to kill him. And that happens from him getting put in the warehouse, and then throughout this entire trudge through the forest, he keeps offering to help, and she's like, I could just shoot you here and nobody would know, and keeps moving on. We learn a little bit more about Mara in this section. When they first crash, she knows all of the stormtrooper procedures and, says we have to leave right now because standard operating procedure for them is to like sweep this area and we have to follow these steps. We also see her use a lightsaber, either meaning she had training before or, some sort of ability with it, because I assume even at this point, like a normal person is not supposed to be able to use a lightsaber, right?
Well, we had that scene of Han chopping a Millennium Falcon in half with one, but yeah, I think the implication is that at the very least, even if it has nothing to do with being force sensitive, it's like a skill that you have to learn.
Yeah, and so that it's all sort of stuff leading up to the reveal that we get with her background. One of the things I found a little strange in this section is Luke is very trusting of Mara, even though she keeps saying she's going to murder him. And like they'll be in the forest, and at night he'll just go to sleep, and she thinks that it's like a trick to try to get the drop on her because she has all the weapons and isn't letting him have a blaster or anything, and he's just dozing off. He never tries to make a play for a weapon or anything, even in situations where he probably would have had the advantage. And we only get this from her perspective. We see her thoughts on it, but we don't actually see what Luke's like reasoning behind this is. And I know that he's supposed to be like a Jedi and at peace here, but it's oddly he's almost too calm even for a Jedi.
Yeah, I mean, I think character-wise, he's the guy that didn't give up on Darth Vader. Like he sees the good in people. That being said, they are explicitly in a spot where he cannot sense the good in people, and so it's less force sensing and more body language
because of the Isal Amiri
they're dampening the force effects,
dampen the force on the entire planet. That I think they said if one of them creates a little bubble, but if you stack them next to each other, it creates like an exponentially larger bubble. So basically this whole forest is 0 force power. So Mara finally comes around a little bit when she's attacked by a Vronskir, which are this reptilian predator in the forest that previously they had just been focused on Luke, and she kept shooting them and saving him. But one of them finally attacks her, and Luke rescues her from it by using the crate dragon call that we see Obi-Wan use in A New Hope. We just said that he can't use the Force right now.
Right.
I had 100% believed that crate dragon call is some sort of Force amplification, but it kind of seems like it's just him pretending to be a crate dragon, and that somehow works, even though crate dragons are not on Mercure. Like,
yeah,
what is going on here?
Well, okay, so at the very least, I would say it stands to reason Luke is from Tatooine, so he could know what a crate dragon sounds like. He does, at the very least, he knows what Ben Kenobi did to help him. Well, maybe he was unconscious, or he
was unconscious.
I guess we don't know in canon that he was definitely totally. Maybe he heard it. maybe Obi-Wan told him about it after. It's conceivable that he could learn this skill, but I agree, it doesn't sound like a sound that you'd be able to make with your mouth without the Force, because Obi-Wan does all these little tricks. But we'll play the sound effect. You can make up your own mind at home if you think this is reasonable to make without the Force. Yeah. So during this little walk through the woods, Mara finally reveals that she was the Emperor's Hand, which is a secret agent who executed his agenda around the galaxy. And namely, she's Force sensitive. And it's kind of, by this point, it's kind of obvious she's been doing all kinds of Jedi adjacent things. But this really, for me at least, starts the long tradition of, the Emperor's spies being Force sensitive people. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like the Force Unleashed video game has you as one of his secret. I guess you're Vader's secret apprentice there, but you at the end, in the bad ending, you turn into like the Sith Stalker, and then eventually in the Disney canon they have the Inquisitors, and there's like all of these different factions of like fallen Jedi or dark Force users that work for the Emperor. I assume he has a mix of just sort of traditional spies that are just regular people that have information networks going around, but then he also has these random people that are his like agents. People have even speculated the Red Guards, the Imperial Red Guards, have lightsabers poking out of their long sticks or something, right? Like that they were once Jedi or something.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that they make the distinction here between Dark Jedi and Emperor's Hand, that she doesn't have full Jedi training, but it's some level of Force ability, because I think you see a lot of that later, especially with the Inquisitors, as a way around the rule of two, that
right.
you have your two Sith, and you can only have two Sith, but then there are all these other characters that are Sith adjacent but not technically Sith, so they don't violate the only two can there be requirement. But this is long before that became established as anything, and we still see Mara as just a spy, essentially. As far as different agents that he would have, so there is Imperial intelligence,
right,
which is sort of a separate thing that showed up on Andor, that got carried over.
Yeah, the ISB.
Yeah,
that was in the source book.
So that that was an intelligence network, but not personally his own agents.
Right.
So there's sort of a distinction there. So as part of this reveal, Luke then recognizes that she was the one from his vision in the Dark Cave, and she says that she was at Jabba's palace, there under instructions from Palpatine to kill Luke, but Jabba didn't let her go to the execution, so she wasn't able to try to kill Luke at the Sarlacc pit. So this is pretty interesting because it implies that the Emperor never bought Vader's whole "he can join us and be a powerful ally" thing, that Palpatine basically knew from the start, like, oh, this is Vader's son, he's clearly going to try to team up with him and kill me. And, sort of pivoted to the second plan once he got brought in front of him on the Death Star. Again, it's another sort of big swing to take, kind of retconning or at least making assumptions about the original movies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate the concept, because I think on one hand it plays really well into a lot of the things that have been established in the modern canon, where it's like Sith are always pitting each other against one another, right? Like they have an apprentice who they're training to kill their master, but the master knows about it, and in some ways it's kind of, I view that as he's also testing Mara. He, everything is a test. Everything is, are you loyal to me? Like, in pitting these people, Luke versus Mara. I don't think it necessarily breaks the ending of Return of the Jedi, because I think he does pretty clearly know that Vader is, emotional about it, and is the cracks are showing. So it's, and then the fact that he was just so quickly willing to be like, well, if you won't join us, then you will die. Like he kind of wins either way. Like he's trying to find the best option of maybe I keep Vader and make him more loyal to me. Maybe I get Luke and turn him to the dark side. In this book, maybe Mara I keep on the back burner as a fallback. Maybe I get Leia. Like all of these things are options, but at the end of the day, he's kind of like, well, I'm still way more powerful than all of you, and I'm still going to wipe out the rebellion, so I'm just going to do what I feel like. But I agree that it does kind of solidify the concept that it's like, oh, he wanted Luke dead from the start. Like that's kind of a big, I don't think he would have been upset about his death if he blew up on Hoth or something, but
he was not as invested in it as Vader was, and understood the potential risk that Luke posed, and just wanted to get him out of the way before this whole Death Star. He already lost one Death Star because of Luke. Yeah. He was probably like, we're not even done with the second one. Let's take this piece off the board. I do like, in general, the idea of Mara working as more of a spy for Palpatine, because you think of him as the Dark Lord that can shoot lightning out of his hands, but probably most of what he did was like bureaucratic stuff, managing the galaxy. So to have somebody that he could send out, for espionage, assassinations, blackmail, negotiations, and stuff like that would make sense, because the sort of prequel version of Palpatine probably didn't go away after he became the Emperor. Like he still had to manipulate the Senate and the governors and everything. And they even say in A New Hope, right, that they finally dissolved the Senate, and that's
20 years
at least 20
after the
years.
Formation of the Empire.
Yeah. So before that time, he's still having to sort of wheel and deal despite being the Emperor.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another one of those examples where, we've been inundated with media about these characters for so long that it's easy to forget what their actual role was in the original story. And when I think of the Emperor, I'm picturing 2005's Battlefront 2 and like double jumping across buildings on Mos Eisley. Like he's not really doing that much in the books or the movies. It makes sense that he's sitting behind a desk most of the day and he needs people to go carry out his will on the down low.
So they reach the end of the edge of the forest and decide that the way they're going to try to get through the ambush is to have the two of them switch places, because Luke is the more recognizable person. So they're going to try to pass Luke off as Jade, because Card never specified whether Jade was a man or a woman when he mentioned that one of his people was chasing after a prisoner. So they'll switch places and try to fool the stormtroopers. And it also means that Mara trusts Luke enough to have the weapons, and it's something she wasn't ready to do earlier.
So this line stood out to me about like the whole Jade thing. I mean, it was clever enough. I just think it's funny that in Star Wars, where character names are just random letters thrown together, that he's like, oh, I need to pick a male sounding name or a gender ambiguous name. It's like, I don't know if Sheev Palpatine has any strong gender connotations, right? Like he could have said anything.
Half the characters are Plu Kloon and Kiadi Mundi, right, and the others are just Luke and Ben,
right,
and Owen.
Yeah, that's true.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just funny to me that such a thing exists. Like it would be overwhelming to think of every name in the galaxy and be like, this makes sense. Yeah, so when they do their little swapping trick, they rub this like plant that causes rashes all over Luke's face so that it puffs up and distorts what his face looks like so he isn't recognized. And it occurred to me that this is exactly what happens in Harry Potter Deathly Hallows, where they have to like zap Harry to contort his face so that they don't recognize him when he gets picked up by Death Eaters. I just thought that was funny, that this is like a recurring thing that happens in books.
J.K. Rowling probably wouldn't be too happy about a man taking a woman's identity for the deception here, though.
That's true. Yeah, and then Card's people turn in Han, so they're also doing their little plan where they pretend to have turned in Han as a suspicious person. And it's all, again, part of the ruse so that they can coordinate with Luke. And they intentionally let their weapons get confiscated because they've been rigged to explode. And I think it's mentioned in this whole scene that guns need to be reloaded with charge packs. I'm not sure if they exactly say that, but again, it's a very small thing, but there's kind of a mental conception when you watch the movies because you don't ever see anyone reload. The obvious implication of that is like, oh, well, are blasters in this universe infinite? Like, can you just fire them forever? I do appreciate that they give some explanation that's non-committal, right? It's like, well, how many rounds does a charge pack in a blaster have? Could be 6, like a normal gun. It could be 10,000. Like, it leaves it open to interpretation to explain why you never see anyone reload, but like it gives it some believability that it's not an infinite resource.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you do see like the stormtrooper belts appear to have ammo pouches or something on them. Chewbacca has his bandolier that may or may not actually have ammo in it or just like tools or something. But a lot of the guns were just
regular
World War II
human
weapons.
guns.
Yeah, that they just spray painted and, made to look a little different. So a lot of them do seem to have like places where a power pack would fit in. These days, like Battlefront especially, you have to reload just because it's a way to sort of balance the game, I guess.
Right. Well, some games have cooldowns. So some of them, it's like you literally see them put a new cartridge into the gun. And then other games, there's a cooldown or just a finite amount and then you're out. But yeah, I don't know. They kind of go back and forth. I mean, I'm not mad if one contradicts the other. I think it's fine to do that. I just thought it was interesting that, again, this book is going out of its way to justify something that I didn't really think too much about when I was watching the movies.
Yeah, so it is sort of a Sarlacc pit situation that they're in again. Like Han and Luke on not a sail car this time, but just like a transport vehicle for prisoners, sort of getting ready to make their move. And so Luke has R2 send a message to 3PO that they should wait to start the ambush until till everybody's under this arch, which normally would be a bad idea because it provides a lot of cover for the stormtroopers, but Luke has a plan that he wants to try. And again, going back to the professionalism of the stormtroopers, he sees that they're sort of preparing as they're getting closer to the arch because they think there could be some sort of ambush coming. But we are put in a situation, a classic 3PO joke, where he gets this important information from R2 and is trying to tell Lando and Card's people, and they keep telling him to shut up because he's so annoying. And he's like, but I must urgently tell you something. And they're just pushing him off to the side before he finally gets through to, I think, Lando, that Luke has some sort of plan to that they need to be under the arch for. So they get the prisoner transport gets underneath the arch. They detonate the blaster packs. The fighting starts, and immediately Card's people are like, why did we do this? They have a bunch of cover now. We're all going to die here. And we once again have Lando being like, Luke has a plan. We got to give him more time. He's going to have that shield down.
Right. Yeah, they really cling on to a handful of lines from the original movies and make that their whole character.
I do like this one, though, because it's not just like, the Cloud City one before was basically pure dialogue, and this one's more like, oh, here we go with Lando again, having to ask for more time, but he's not just saying the same exact lines back.
Right. Yeah. So R2D2 shoots Luke his lightsaber, and Luke drops the arch on the stormtroopers and artillery, not by throwing his lightsaber, is it? Or I forget. Is it the third time?
So the arch has 2 bases, right?
Yeah.
So he runs towards one and slices it, and then throws his lightsaber to take down the other side.
Yeah. So really getting some mileage out of the lightsaber throw. But yeah, it is nice to see the Jedi win with a plan, with actual smarts, and not just overwhelming the Force. I think my current point of reference is the Clone Wars TV show, where the Jedi are, in modern day, are pretty overpowered, and most problems get solved by just force throwing a lot of things or blaster deflecting infinitely. I felt when we were reading this book, there is a sense of danger that the plan isn't going to work and that they do really need every advantage they can get. Like, he's not going to just be able to run in with his lightsaber and block 800 blaster bolts and beat the whole, legion of stormtroopers or whatever. Not legion, but
I mean, he might be able to, but they took away his force powers for this fight, at least.
That's true.
So, but yeah, it's cool to see him in situations where he can't just force his way out and has to use his brain. And being a Jedi is more than just the ability to lift rocks.
Right.
All right. So, final section. Luke, Han, and Lando head to the New Republic base on Sluis Van to get medical treatment for Lando. Coincidentally, this is also where Thrawn plans to deploy the mole miners he stole from Lando on Naklan in order to steal warships from the Sluis Van shipyards. He leaves Sabaoth out of the plan, partly to prove to the volatile Jedi Master that he is not indisposable, and partly because the cloaking shield taken from the schematics found in Mount Tantus have been completed. The cloaking shield leaves ships undetectable on scanners, though still visible to the naked eye. It is used to conceal TIE fighters, mole miners, and space troopers, stormtroopers in vacuum-sealed suits that can maneuver in space, inside of an unmarked freighter. The freighter is sent into the shipyard under the guise of needing repairs. Wedge Antilles, who is guarding the base with Rogue Squadron, notices something suspicious about the freighter, but before he can mobilize a defense, the freighter explodes. TIE fighters flood out of the explosion, causing havoc and providing cover as the rest of Thrawn's forces move in. The space troopers use mole miners to burrow into empty warships and take control of their bridges. They then move the commandeered ships towards Thrawn's fleet, while also attacking New Republic forces. Han, Lando, and Luke arrive as the attack begins. In the heat of battle, Han recognizes Lando's mole miners, and Lando is able to remotely activate them, disabling the warship bridges. This halts the Imperial effort, but leaves the New Republic fleet severely damaged. Seeing that his plan has failed, Thrawn cuts his losses and retreats. Soon after the battle, Leia contacts Han to tell him that Admiral Akbar has been arrested on treason charges. He and Luke must return to Coruscant to counter Phalea's bid for power and prevent civil war. To be continued. So we get our first Wedge POV section here, where he is becoming more of a main character. And we also get a little bit of backstory with him, that he has been up for promotions, but keeps denying them so he can continue to fly with Rogue Squadron. And that one sentence will then lead into the X-Wing series, where he's one of the main characters leading Rogue Squadron. Another interesting thing that gets mentioned here is that the X-Wing is steered with an etheric rudder. Now, how's your physics history knowledge?
I know what a rudder is because I've been in a boat before.
So, the prevailing theory before we sent things into space and understood that it was empty space in a vacuum was that the universe outside of planets was all sort of swimming in this type of matter called ether that had strange properties and kind of accounted for all of the phenomena that wasn't understood. So we're talking basically up until Einstein, with his theory of relativity that kind of figured out a lot of those mechanics. But going back to mid second millennia, so like Newton and Galileo at that time, the general theory was that there was some sort of matter that all of the sort of area around planets were made up of. So the fact that an X-Wing has an etheric rudder kind of implies that Star Wars physics is following 16th century science and not, modern, not
Well,
what we know to be true.
I could see this as being sort of a misnomer where it's like they use the word etheric to describe how it's observed, what it looks like to an observer, which is being able to change direction arbitrarily in a vacuum with no gravity.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't actually mean that it's navigating the ether. That's how I don't know.
Have you also heard the fan theory that says that just physics are different in Star Wars and that's why you can hear explosions in space? Because this would explain it.
I mean, yeah, fair enough.
I don't actually subscribe to this. There are times in the books where there is explicitly vacuum in space, and I never one time watched the movies and was like, oh, we can hear the explosions, therefore, things must be different. It's movie. It makes the movies more exciting.
Right.
But I don't know. I just thought it was funny that the X-Wing itself has something that sort of is in line with the weird physics theory.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of now we have space whales, right?
Yeah.
What are they swimming in? I don't know. Not a vacuum. So yeah, it's becoming more essential to throw your hands up and say it's all different. So at the end of this book, we get our final taste of Thrawn's military tactics. And in this battle, we get to see space troopers in action. And space troopers are basically regular stormtroopers inside these mech suits that can fly around freely in space. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about before. I looked a bit into it in the West End Game source book, and they kind of listed alongside other variations of stormtroopers like scout troopers and snow troopers. And I think in my head, it was kind of this thing that lots of other expanded universe media have kind of come up with on their own. So I'm interested to see going forward, as we read more of these, how other books are going to, if they're going to consider this to be sort of the canon explanation for what a space trooper is, or if they're going to come up with their own sort of version of stormtroopers in space.
Yeah. Thrawn makes a comment about space troopers always thinking that they're invincible as they're zipping around attacking these ships. I think that idea is a little too close to anime nonsense for my taste here, because you think about it, you're exposed in space during a battle. Like any errant laser blast kills you, any ship running into you kills you, any sort of shrapnel from an explosion kills you, and instead it's not quite somebody just whipping out a sword and slicing ships in half, but it's sort of in that area, which is not typically what you see in Star Wars.
Yeah, I think it also kind of breaks the illusion around the fact that spaceships would be flying really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like fighter jets in real life are too fast to see. I can only imagine what a super futuristic spaceship would do. And if you picture a guy out there in a little robot suit, like flying to a ship, how quickly they would just get splattered like a bug on a windshield if a ship flew by.
So we do see what I think is my favorite tactic from Thrawn during this battle, where the Chimera loses starboard shields, and rather than turning or some other tactic, he just orders his gunners to target the guns on an enemy freighter, take them all out, and then use attractor beams to pull the frigate close and basically act as a secondary shield that protects the starboard side from incoming fire.
Yeah, I love this because it's utilizing the environment in a clever way. It's something that translates really well in the book. Like you can just very easily picture it, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's a utility for the tractor beam that I had just never considered. So yeah, I really like this scene too.
We also see that as soon as the ships get disabled, Thrawn just cuts his losses and pulls out, just demonstrating that he's not your typical bad guy that will, end up pursuing things even after they're lost and losing because of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's even a line where Pelion's kind of standing there like, what do we do? And Thrawn's like, were you expecting me to just go out in a blaze of glory? Like, no, we did what we needed to. We disabled their fleet. Yeah, we don't get to bring it with us, but there is no point in sacrificing, half of our forces just to make a point. Like, let's just leave. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess we can do that.
Yeah, he understands the position that the Imperial forces are in right now, where they're severely outnumbered and they have to be very careful with how they do things.
Yeah, which I think goes along perfectly with what you said of using the enemy frigate as a shield. It's like, use the resources you have efficiently. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then the kind of big star of this whole conflict is the cloaking device that they attached to their freighter that they used that was hiding all of the TIE fighters and stormtroopers. And this is another just classic Star Wars can of worms that this book decided to open. We do have a canon a canon mention of cloaking devices in Empire Strikes Back, where there's the famous line that the Millennium Falcon does its little trick. It flies behind a Star Destroyer and then falls off their scopes. And they're like, no ship that small has a cloaking device. So it's clearly a thing that exists.
Yeah, a bigger ship could have a cloaking device. Yeah.
Right. And what exactly does that mean? Does it turn invisible? But all we really see is it goes off of their scanners. And, kind of to that point, it's like people in these huge spaceship, warships are not relying on looking out the front window, right? Like in a piece of technology that big and that complicated, you're almost entirely relying on sensor data. It would be totally ridiculous to have keep someone posted at every corner of the ship looking out a window. Anyway, yeah, so in this book, they sort of established that the cloaking device doesn't literally make you invisible. It just masks your signature so that people can't read the contents of your ship. And this is kind of how real life stealth ships work. I don't know. I do find it funny that occasionally people will be surprised when it turns out that real life stealth bombers aren't actually invisible. It's like, well, yeah, because it's flying faster than the speed of sound. You're not going to see it anyway. The thing that you need to worry about is radar and radio waves and infrared. And so I like the concept here that, it's not just magic, right? It's not space magic. It's actually believable technology. I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll have, cloaking devices in real life at some point. But the main thing that people should actually care about is hiding your presence. But that contradicts other things in Star Wars. The one I can remember the best is Rebel Assault 2, which is an old CD-ROM game for DOS.
So fighters that size can have a cloaking device in that case.
Right. Yeah, they create these TIE fighters called the TIE...
They're the Phantom Fighters.
The TIE Phantoms, yeah. That can just completely turn invisible. So, and then, yeah, in eventually in the Clone Wars TV show, they did have a cloaking device that turned a ship invisible and I think also masked their signature. So, yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I do appreciate this book attempting to not make it too overpowered, right? If actual cloaking invisibility shields existed, I think that breaks a lot of the combat. So I'm glad there was some restraint there.
One final note is that towards the end of the battle, Thrawn either looks out the window or notices on sensors that the Millennium Falcon is out there towing Luke's disabled X-Wing, which basically confirms for him that Luke was on Merkur and Carta played him. And all he does is he just sort of sees it. He goes to Pelion like, son of a, I knew it. But he, I don't know. It's not like an angry reaction as much as it's just, it confirmed what he knew, but he didn't, play on it. Right. And I don't know. It's just kind of funny that this super genius that they're worried about, how many seats are at dinner or knows how much time it takes for people to flip during the transfer between the Millennium Falcon and the Lady Luck, is basically outsmarted with Scooby-Doo antics by Card, just, moving people from different warehouses and switching up names and stuff.
Yeah, right. It's they kind of made him too smart in earlier parts of the book, because if he was as observant as he's supposed to be, then it's obvious to the reader that this is going on right under his nose. Yeah.
All right, so that concludes the summary of Heir to the Empire. It only took 2.5, 3 hours. We'll see. But what were your overall impressions, Chris? What did you think of Heir?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, this is the second time I'm reading this book. I didn't remember very much about it, and I've seen so many Disney Plus TV shows at this point that it's kind of wiped my memory of what these books were. And I was just very surprised to find that I liked it a lot. You know, I nitpicked a lot of things in our summary, but that was all kind of minor stuff. On the whole, I found it to be very entertaining. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. For the most part, I enjoyed the characterization. It is very much a product of the 90s. Like, there are a lot of bizarre little things that pop up here and there. But yeah, it's better than I remember, and there are some cracks that show, but I liked it a lot. I think one thing that stood out to me that I hadn't noticed before was they go into extreme detail in explaining how things work. I think that's largely a product of this being sort of a companion piece to the tabletop game in some ways, where they have all of this complicated material to explain things. Just to name a few, it's like, how do the parts in Luke's robotic hand work? How does R2D2 communicate with the X-Wing? How does a beckon call work for summoning ships remotely? Like, what are the buttons on a lightsaber? Do you have to push them? Do you hold them? And, you know, all of these things are explored. The movies never dealt with any of that, right? And so, you know, for better or for worse, it's very different. I think it works pretty well in the book. It gives you a little bit more than you would get from sort of the condensed storytelling in a movie, but it does create sort of a different feel. It makes it feel a little more real, which I think it worked for me, but loses maybe just a tiny bit of the Star Wars magic in doing so.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling you'll get from most of these books, just from the fact that Zahn and most of these writers come from a sci-fi and fantasy background where they've had to create these worlds and lore from scratch. So there's sort of a ton of thought put into it, and especially with the new movies and the new TV shows, that's more TV writers and movie writers creating shows. So they have a different background. They have sort of different areas that they focus on. The crazy lore is less important when you're making a TV show. You're more sort of just focused on what's being shown on screen. You can't take, 3 pages to explain the intricacies of galactic trade or something. So it is sort of an adjustment to make. I'm not saying that the new shows are bad because of that, but it is nice to have other options. And I'm sure that the new novels go into things at this depth as well.
Sure. Yeah, and my biggest kind of dive into the Legends continuity up to that point was mostly things that came out during the prequel era, and just I was pleasantly surprised as I was reading this to see how many of the concepts in this book in particular made their way into later entries in the series. So just as one specific example, I read the Republic comics. I think they were published by Dark Horse around the time when the prequels came out. And there's one particular story arc that I remember very clearly where they feature battle meditation. They talk about Sparty cylinders and cloning. They mention the Nogri homeworld. And, and then even now with the Mandoverse and Dave Filoni's projects, a lot of things from this book also made it there. So the Marg Sable, the opening scene in this book where Thrawn does his little tactical maneuver, is featured in an episode of Clone Wars. And that was a really interesting Easter egg because they don't at that point, they don't mention Thrawn at all. It has nothing to do with Thrawn. and it's cool to see like an Easter egg of a tactic, right? It's like not even a character or a ship or something. It's just like a thing that happens, harkens back to this book. So I didn't love how it was used in that episode, but I think it's cool that something as abstract as like a tactical maneuver could make its way. And then, Mount Tantus, which is sort of one of the big set pieces in this book, is the focus of an entire season of the Bad Batch. And they touch on a lot of those concepts of like cloning and Jedi and secret projects and all that stuff. It's pretty different in execution, but yeah, it's just kind of neat to come full circle where Bad Batch is kind of one of the most recent things that I watched, and it connects all the way back to Heir to the Empire. But yeah, what was your reaction to reading this book?
Yeah, I mean, so I've read this at least 5 times. It's probably closer to the 10 at this point, to be honest. And I think Zahn is definitely one of the better writers in all of the EU. It moves really quickly. It keeps you engaged. A thing that I noticed this time is that there's not a lot of wasted space in terms of dialogue and description, and that basically even offhand comments or descriptions are sort of feeding forward to things that are going to show up later. So knowing what happens in the next 2 books, a lot of the dialogue that just seemed like sort of filler was actually foreshadowing or referencing things that are going to become important in the future. So I really sort of admired how tight all of that was, that he wasn't just writing dialogue for dialogue. The other thing, my other main takeaway is that a lot of modern Star Wars and just like, if you want to call it like fandom stuff like Marvel or, whatever, a lot of the conflict is built around just miscommunications between characters, or a certain character deciding to go off on their own and getting in trouble and, making mistakes. And in Heir to the Empire, everybody pretty much knows what they're doing, and the conflict is how they work together, against each other, and how their plans sort of play off each other. And we don't have these sort of plot contrivances to drive things forward. And, again, part of that it's a novel, so you only have one main story to tell. You're not telling a new plot every week, but just comparing to a lot of the newer stuff, which admittedly are sort of targeted at a younger audience, it was sort of refreshing to see a plot less dependent on sort of those cliches.
I agree.
Yeah, and one of the things I think we talked about a bit was just all the callbacks. One of the ones I really liked was the whole, we don't have time to discuss this as a committee, I am not a committee, has become an inside joke between Han and Leia. So they repeat it, but sort of setting one another up for it. And Luke watches this happen and thinks to himself, like, I really should ask them one day, like, what that was all about. So they say it enough to each other that it's become sort of this running joke that Luke isn't actually in on, but I guess hasn't had the time to break down. Like, so what do you mean committee? Why do you keep saying this to each other?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I feel like that's a more graceful use of it, of weaving it into the characters rather than it just being, hey, remember when they said this?
So this book does kind of set the template for all of the novels going forward. They all sort of follow the same tone and vibe that this book sets up. We see that despite the new Republic taking control of the galaxy and should be solving problems, it all kind of boils down to our main trio running around the galaxy, chasing or running away from stormtroopers, basically replaying the original trilogy out in different sort of remixed situations. I guess it would probably be a boring book otherwise if you don't have those things, but at some point it's like, hey, Leia, you're like the vice president now. You can't just be jetting off somewhere to investigate something and shoot stormtroopers. Another thing is the twins being threatened with kidnapping. best get used to that plot point, because this will not be the last by any means of the twins either people trying to kidnap them or them actually being kidnapped.
I'm already tired of it, if I'm honest. Like, I'm ready for them to be born so we can shut up about it. But
once they're born, they're just targets that can be somewhere else.
yeah, I thought this was really interesting to read a book that was in the business of building new concepts instead of just referencing what was already established, right? You know, it's easy to forget that there was a time when it was unheard of for a book to impact the mainline product, and now it's, you know, you're almost expected to do your homework on expanded universe content, right? If you watch a movie, and again, this goes for more than just Star Wars, it's like Marvel does this. You have to watch the show to learn who all these characters are and what the context is and see what happened off screen. But back then, you know, that just wasn't the case. And so the fact that concepts like Coruscant and, you know, some of the ship designs and other things eventually did make their way into either the special edition re-releases or the prequels themselves. You know, I feel like this book and the books that came after it kind of set that precedent and proved that it's a viable model. I mean, but you know, you think about the percentage of Star Wars fans who, or we'll just say people that have watched Star Wars and maybe watched the TV shows that have actually read this book is probably pretty low. So the fact that they kind of did this at all is still a bit amazing to me.
Yeah, we joked a bit about all the callbacks, but we actually do get a lot of new material and concepts that are introduced here. So it would have been very easy to just have it be more of the same, but they really did try to, you know, do something different here.
Yeah, and not all of it works. Some of it's very dumb and bad, but yeah, I'd say on the whole, the new concepts fit really well, right? It's more of just fighting against what I already know about Star Wars, and that goes for the Clone Wars as well. Like, they reference the Clone Wars in this book, and I had to constantly remind myself that none of the new movies and none of the TV shows had happened yet, and they had sort of their own conception of what it was. And I think when you put yourself in that mindset of, okay, this is its own continuity and it fits into the original trilogy only, it works pretty well. Like, I think it totally works fine. But yeah, I think you kind of mentioned it, but in a lot of ways, this is just a soft reboot of the original trilogy where you get sort of the greatest hits from there.
It is, but in a more subtle way than, say, The Force Awakens was,
Yes.
which just took like set pieces and redid them. That this more took, you know, similar situations and made some callbacks, but it was all new material and new concepts.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to mention too is I thought Heir to the Empire is just a really good title. And you know, I looked up this up before. One of the rejected titles for the book was Wild Card, because it's about Talon Card and Thrawn is a wild card. I don't know, but like
he did sneak that name into the book though, because that's the name of Card's ship.
Right.
Is the Wild Card.
Yeah, which is kind of goofy. Like, if that were the name of this book, I don't think it would be very popular. Like,
No.
Heir to the Empire has so much more gravitas to it, and it's so layered because Thrawn himself is sort of the inheritor, the de facto inheritor of the Imperial fleet. Luke and Leia are sort of the unwilling heirs to Darth Vader's legacy. You know, Jerus Sabaoth is sort of the physical manifestation of a dark Jedi that's replacing the Emperor. And then the New Republic as a whole, you know, it's setting up shop in the building that the Empire used to be run from. You know, it's like all of these different characters and things are in their own way the heirs to the empires or their respective relation to the Empire. And it just, I don't know, I feel like as a theme that is present through the entire book in a really nice way.
Yeah, it's funny that he went through like 7 different titles before getting to this one, and I think the wiki said it wasn't even his title. It was like the publisher suggested it eventually.
Wow. Okay. So even more coincidental than I realized. So now, since there were so many things we wanted to talk about with Thrawn, with Grand Admiral Thrawn. We're going to have our own entire discussion about him as a character.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I was surprised about how more emotional Thrawn was in this. That my memory was that he was this cool, calculating villain, but there are quite a few instances where he shows actual rage or just general emotions than I expected. At the beginning, when he's on Wayland and he's threatening villagers, and one of the villagers tries to shoot him, he tries to kill the villager, and Sabaoth stops him, and he's legitimately angry at Sabaoth not letting him murder this villager. And we see a few other instances like that when he figures out that Card betrayed him, and he's pretty mad there. He hears news that the Mount Tantus projects are going well, and he shows delight, and it just didn't exactly vibe with sort of what my general the Thrawn that I had in my mind was.
Yeah, he feels like he's written younger than I remember. He seems more, I don't know, less like withered. Like he's very sharp, obviously, but yeah, that sort of emotional reaction to a lot of things made me picture him more as like in his late 20s rather than, I think before I kind of pictured like late 40s or something. Maybe somewhere in between, but
they mention he's from pre-Clone War era, so
right.
Like, yeah, I don't know
what his race,
how they age, but yeah, I mean, he'd be in his like 40s or 50s, you'd think.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. I think it makes him a more interesting character to have a broader range of emotions than just I am so smart and calculating and nothing phases me. I mean, he is very edgy, right? He's a little too mustache twirlingly evil at certain points. And, we've talked this to death, but it is pretty unbelievable that he can guess the species of someone commanding a ship based on like 5 seconds of data that he collected and the art of that species. But, I think if you suspend your disbelief a little bit, it works pretty well because he's actually competent and effective. And one of my least favorite things on TV shows or other stories where you have a character that's supposedly hyper competent, hyper intelligent, but then they have to lose every week at the end of the show because otherwise there would be no show. Like if the heroes lost every time, then it would just be over. And a lot of times in those kinds of shows, the enemy has to spin a loss as a victory and be like, oh, but actually this is a good thing. And it's like, is it though? Because you lost. And that kind of happens at the end of this book, but it's reasonable because A, we watch him win like 5 battles in a row right before this. And then B, it still is kind of a victory because they attack the shipyard, they disable all these ships, and they send the New Republic into disarray. It's like, okay, the second half of capturing the ships didn't work, but like it still came out in the Empire's favor. And so, yeah, I thought that was just like, that was a much better characterization. And we can talk about how he's depicted in Rebels and Ahsoka, but I'll just summarize by saying they do that a lot on those shows where the villain just loses outright, but they have to spin it as a victory.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is the first appearance of Thrawn, so a lot of the sort of depth around him that came from other material hasn't been established at this point, and we don't get any backstory from him here, and we don't even get any POV sections from him. It's always through the eyes of Pelion or through the eyes of Card, so we never really exactly know what his motivations are or what he's thinking in any situation. And so I think kind of that emotionless, calculating character that maybe isn't as much of a pure villain is something that actually shows up later, and we're sort of like projecting back that idea, not what's actually in the source material.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think it works really well to the book's favor that we don't really get internal monologues from Thrawn, because you, the viewer, are also trying to kind of figure out how much he knows. And that adds to the mystery of the whole thing. One thing about him that I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but this is kind of how I read it, is Thrawn has sort of internalized racism, where, one of the themes of the book is that the Empire is mostly human, and so it's unusual that this like blue-skinned weirdo is like the most important person in the Empire. But at the same time, he's judging everyone else based on their race, right? It's like he's pigeonholed the Nogri into being his bodyguards. He treats other species as being, sort of one note based on their art. And so I kind of like this idea that this sort of fascist guy thinks everybody else is like super predictable or whatever, but not him. And he's one of the good ones,
Yeah, it really shows out when he's talking about the Nogri and will just be disparaging them in front of Rook with like just so much disdain, and there's paying no mind to the fact that Rook could just murder him at any time. Like they're these ultimate killing machines, and he doesn't even consider them like a threat because he sees himself as so far above the Nogri.
Yeah. The other thing about him that I just couldn't stop thinking about while I was reading this book, I've been playing Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition somewhat regularly recently, and like the way he conducts himself on the battlefield reminds me a lot of watching high-level Age of Empires players. In the opening scene, he like sends out a couple of scouts and then recalls them back, is just like spending the lowest amount of resources as he can to gather whatever information he can get. And like that's how RTS players actually play, is you send scouts and survey the base, and then it's like it's this constant balance of managing resources and like micromanaging individual units to use them to their fullest. When I play, I don't do that. I just crank out as many like high level fighters as I can and just send them in and hope they don't all die. And that's how Imperial commanders in other media are portrayed, as just like overwhelming force of sending TIE fighters. And here it's like most of the time he has one Star Destroyer and a couple squadrons of TIEs, and he uses them very effectively. The scene where they try to steal all the ships is like sending out an army of monks in Age of Empires to convert the enemy team, right? It's like he's using all of his tools to keep their enemies off balance. And I really love that. Again, it's so much more interesting than a villain whose plan is just make bigger super weapons, make more soldiers, right?
Yeah, writing a genius character is walking a very thin line, because if you don't do it well, it becomes just unbelievable and you're rolling your eyes constantly. Have you seen Skyfall?
The James Bond movie?
Yeah.
That's the one with like the hacker guy that, he hacks
Javier Bardem's character. Yeah, it just I know a lot of people like that movie, but like the elements of his plan that go right for him despite not having any way of knowing what, like he bases his plan around like escaping jail at a certain time so that the train can crash into a specific thing, and with no way of knowing how all this would work out. And it just, I don't know, those types of genius characters never sit well with me. And I think for the most part, Thrawn avoids a lot of those pitfalls in this book. And a lot of what we see are things like using the cloaking shield and finding, smart ways to turn the tides in battle. So one other thing that we should take a look at is how our main trio of Luke, Han, and Leia are portrayed. They were the main characters in the original movies, so it's a good idea, I think, to see sort of how they come across here and how they differ from their movie versions. So, starting off with Luke, his main thing here is he's still trying to revive the Jedi, but even 5 years after Return of the Jedi, he hasn't actually trained anybody. He's still just kind of moving around, gathering information. It is a pretty different depiction than what we get in The Mandalorian, where he seems a lot more aloof and a lot more sort of detached from everything compared to how he's portrayed in the original trilogy. I think he's a lot closer to that in this book. I might also just be confusing the like weird AI dialogue and face as like detachment and aloofness when really he's supposed to be like a more personable person, but it just doesn't come across correctly.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think, we get a lot more internal monologuing from Luke in this book than you would in a TV show. And he definitely still comes across as very early in his Jedi career. He's still wondering, Obi-Wan Kenobi disappears at the start of this book. So he presumably still kind of considered himself not as a full Jedi Master, even though that was kind of like his stated arc in Return of the Jedi. Yeah, I think the other depiction I compare it to is Battlefront 2, the new one from EA. In the story mode, you get to play as Luke for a couple scenes, and that's one of my favorite depictions of Luke. I think it leans more closely to the Mandalorian one, where he's more experienced. He's kind of this Zen Jedi who is sort of off doing his own thing in the galaxy, and that one kind of balances this concept of a Jedi being a peacekeeper with him just being like a violent killing machine. This book does a lot of that too. He like definitely kills a lot of people. So I think they're still trying to kind of figure out the balance between how do we make compelling action scenes and make it, this exciting thing where a knight is running around slicing people with his sword, but also making him this like compassionate person that is trying to find a way around violence. And I'm just, I'm excited to see where they take Luke in the next like 10 years of expanded universe content.
Yeah. Moving on to Han, he's still basically the same character that we see in the original trilogy. The main difference here is that we are starting to see protective family man Han. So seems to be more worried about Leia's safety than even Leia is herself. He wants her to take time off from the Senate just to train to be a Jedi so she's able to protect herself better. When they're on Bimasari, he makes the executive decision to just bail on the mission after the Nogri attack. So we still see him doing a lot of his smuggler things, but now that he has a family and something to actually lose, you see him, changing and becoming more cautious in that way.
Yeah, it's hard not to compare this to the sequel trilogy, but like this version of Han is already it's only a marginal difference from Return of the Jedi, but it's still kind of more character development than he got in all of Force Awakens.
Yeah, I mean, well, there he was still just, running around smuggling when he was like 70 years old. So
yeah. Yeah, speaking of Leia, she's trying to train as a Jedi, but she's balancing that with her political responsibilities, and those generally need to take precedent. Yeah, it kind of puts her in a weird spot because I think really the only role we've seen her in before was sort of as a military, like either as a combatant or as a general, or what I forget what her rank is, but
yeah, I mean, I think in the sequels she's a general. They never really specify beyond princess what her like title is, but yeah, she's appears to be in charge at Hoth at the very least. Yeah, and I mean, I'd say that she's the biggest departure from the movies out of these three because they're leaning into the political side, and that is mainly just extrapolated from being royalty from Alderaan and a senator at the beginning of A New Hope. But yeah, we don't really see any of her being a senator. It's just a fact that's stated. This book is sort of the template going forward, so the political leader is sort of going to be Leia's main role in a lot of these books. I think actually in the new canon she starts off that way, and then the public finds out that she's Vader's daughter, and it basically like ends her political career. And so that I think that's what they use to explain why she's just off leading the resistance in the sequel trilogy and not part of like the New Republic government there.
Do you think they came up with that before or after the movie was met with mixed reactions?
I mean, this was. I think these came out like after Force Awakens, so it was trying to fill in the time between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. So
Okay.
prior to the Last Jedi backlash.
So now we want to try to answer the question: could this be adapted to the modern canon? And the reason we're asking this question is because, when Disney took over Star Wars, the rights to Star Wars, a lot of people were very upset that they didn't just remake this book trilogy, or that
Maybe not a lot, but some
a vocal minority
of people that read the book. Maybe.
Yeah. I guess I can give my opinion. I mean, short answer is no. Like, definitely not. The second you read this thing, to me, it feels like this is absolutely not a suitable direct sequel to the original trilogy. It's very much its own self-contained adventure. And I picture it as DLC for the original trilogy, right? It's like, if you liked the first 3 movies, then you're going to love more of this. It's a great continuation, but for so many reasons just doesn't work for me as like the canon next movies.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely more of like a interceding story between what you would call the big trilogy, where if we wanted to do 7, 8, 9 properly, it wouldn't just be the continuing adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. The prequels were about Anakin and Obi-Wan. The original trilogy was Luke's story. The sequel trilogy should be somebody new in a new generation, and I mean that is more or less what they went with Rey, and I think conceptually that's the right way to go. It shouldn't just be more of the same with Luke and Han and Leia as the main characters.
Yeah, totally agree. Like, the setting and thematic framework for the sequel trilogy, I think, was exactly what it needed to be. It's just the execution was all over the place. And then I think the other big thing is sort of how these stories are told. The original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, both of the George Lucas trilogies, are so entwined with his filmmaking style, where he talks about them all the time as how they're sort of meant to be viewed as silent films, where he doesn't really care about the dialogue or the like nitty-gritty story elements. He's trying to, whether he's successful or not, he's trying to tell big stories about imperialism and make Vietnam War allegories, and the whole thing is told through the language of film references. I just never took him to be someone who cares about canon and continuity. And he does care about lore. There's like a little bit of a difference. A lot of the earlier drafts of Star Wars had more mentions of the Sith and the Wills and like all of these kind of heady concepts. But this book is sort of obsessed with making sense of the Star Wars universe. And so I just kind of view this as the extremely bizarre contradiction between the kinds of movies that George Lucas wanted to make and the hyper detail-oriented expanded universe that these books create. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, that they can't exist together. I guess I'm just saying you can't just take these books as is and plop them into a movie and have it be like capital S Star Wars. Could it have worked as a TV show? Totally. I think this would be awesome as like a miniseries. I think also you could embody some of that like film reference technique into the book if you did the same thing with like literary references. The problem is I'm like way not well read enough to even recognize them if they're happening, but like I can just as a contrived example, it's like Moby Dick in space could be a book, right? Like Heart of Darkness but in Star Wars could be a book. These books didn't really seem like that. They felt more like sort of self-contained pulp that you pick up at an airport and read on the plane. Like they're not exactly like high art in that regard. Not that it's bad. It's just not what Star Wars is when you think about the original original trilogy.
So it's funny you mentioned TV show because we're going to find out how much of this does get adapted into the upcoming Filoniverse content, right? I think there's like another season of Mandalorian and Ahsoka, and supposedly a movie coming to tie together all of this stuff. So we'll see how many elements get borrowed or ripped completely into those shows.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because obviously they can't use the original actors for those shows, right? Like they can't just set it at the same time.
Well,
I really hope they don't deep fake the whole thing. They could recast. I guess what I'm saying is there is some potential benefit to shifting the story around a little bit so that it's focused on other characters, so that it's like they can kind of do whatever they want with it, and you're not beholden to having Han, Luke, and Leia running around the galaxy in their continuing adventures, right? Like, I think there's a way to make it work where it's roughly the same story, but told through the eyes of different characters. Again, we'll see how successful that is, but
yeah, and I guess speaking of the new content with Thrawn, it's been I think like 10 years since Rebels finished, something like that. So it's been a while since I've seen any of that material, but I did take the time to watch a 50-minute YouTube video that had all of the Thrawn scenes from Rebels. And my general impression was that Thrawn is just kind of a more watered down Saturday morning cartoon version of the character that we see here. There's a lot more monologuing and like mustache twirling evil involved, but overall still basically the same character. So they do make an effort to mention the artwork stuff, but instead of using it to classify aliens, he's trying to psychoanalyze the rebels, specifically Sabine, because she's like an artist, right? So he sees some of her art and makes some judgments off of it, but I don't think it actually goes anywhere. It's just him sort of, we need a scene of him talking about art right now. I mean, it's different because everybody on Rebels is kind of dumb, especially like the Imperials that aren't the main character Imperials. Like your rank and file officers are all kind of morons. So the bar to clear to be the super genius is a lot lower. And the like the plots that he comes up with don't have to be that complicated. Like there's nothing close to the cloaking shield plan that he does throughout the entire series. And we never see anything like do you know the difference between an error or a mistake scene to sort of flesh things out that way. But I think, a lot of that can be explained by just it being targeted towards a younger audience, and you don't want these like really elaborate plots. They're harder to follow on like a TV format. My main issue with Rebels Thrawn is that it's just the wrong story for him to be in. So Heir to the Empire, he shows up when the Empire's on the verge of death, and he can make all these gains against the New Republic while the New Republic is still in charge. So there's a lot of opportunity to showcase his brilliance and to come up with different plans and to actually win. On Rebels, he's dispatched by Tarkin to deal with a single Rebel cell that's mostly just like our 5 main characters. And if he actually was this tactical genius, he should have crushed them in like a long weekend. Like it shouldn't have been even this drawn out battle. But instead you just have him, losing a lot of the time and drawing a lot of the time. And it seems like there's a lot of his appeal is just based off the fact that the voice actor is very good and gives a very menacing performance. And people have this concept of Thrawn being this great villain, but he just doesn't have a lot of chances to actually demonstrate that through the whole series. I guess there's a chance with the new stuff now. It is a more similar situation to Heir of the Empire, so he could actually, win some battles in this one.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but much more excited to see where they're going to take him in the new show, because it's like the new shows are, or the live action shows rather, are more targeted towards older audiences, and then the Republic in particular is kind of in a slight amount of disarray. Like they're still building. They're not fully formed yet. That's like exactly the conditions that Thrawn needs to really make a dent and drive a wedge through them.
Yeah, I think in general with Thrawn and with basically anything that migrates its way over into the new canon, I'm not usually a fan of it that much, but I am able to sort of just separate it as, they have the same names and there's the same concepts, but they are just separate things that don't impact the legends at all.
Yeah, and that's something I feel like media consumers have to do everywhere else. Like there's 100 different versions of Batman. No one gets mad when people get mad when they reboot Batman, but like no one's confused when they do it, right? And in a lot of ways, that's what's happening here, is these are just different interpretations of the same stories. The problem is that's like very explicitly not the mission statement of the Legends continuity. Like Legends was a very clear attempt to unify all the disparate media into a single narrative, and everybody has to be kind of on the same page of how things work and where the overall story is going. And so when you have one rogue storyteller just kind of doing their own thing, it rocks the foundation of the entire continuity. So, our intention here is not to say like it's bad because it's different. Like again, Star Wars was never really about continuity. But if you're going to go out of your way to pull in all these concepts from the Legends continuity and put it into the Disney continuity, you should at least honor the parts that people like about it. Otherwise, you lose the benefit of having this continuity in the first place. Like, what's the point? I suppose it's just brand recognizability at this point, but I would strongly prefer that they do something interesting with it instead of just, look at this, remember this?
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, Thrawn is pretty similar, but in a lot of cases, things are so different that you might as well have just created something new. The name recognition doesn't do much for me.
Right.
All right. So we've talked about quite a lot. Before we go, we have one final segment, the Glup Shido Award. Back in 2020, Tumblr user Gam Jabbar posted, every time a new Star Wars movie or show is announced, all the fans are like, oh my god, Glup Shido is back, crying emoji. So every episode, we would like to give the Glup Shido Award to a particular character that fans would go unreasonably crazy over if they ever made a canon appearance. Bonus points for having a ridiculous name, and if they're a weird slug alien or something, that's also a plus. So there are a few candidates in this book, but Chris, which one do you think is most worthy of the Glup Shido Award?
Yeah, there's definitely some weird ones. Not too many weird aliens in this book. So, yeah, I think the best one is Jerus Sabaoth. I would say specifically the clone. I think they both work, but the clone in particular, with its weird vocal tick pronunciation, just so bizarre. And yeah, if they showed up on a TV show, my eyes might roll into the back of my head. Like I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also, he's recognizable enough that segments of the fan base would, get super excited, like, oh man, they're bringing Sabaoth back. Like, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I would be especially excited because I don't think anyone actually knows how to pronounce his name.
No.
I'm not convinced that the way we're saying it is correct. We found this online, but it could be Kabouth for all I know.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we know, Thrawn doesn't have like some crazy Jedi master with him. I know there were some, although there's something going on that planet, like Force related. So maybe something similar to Sabaoth could end up showing up.
It's scary how easily they could bring this character into the new shows. I'll just say that.
Mount Tantus is there. They
canon.
could just stumble upon him like, hanging out at one of the planets or one in the village there.
Yep.
All right, so that concludes the first episode of Tales from the Old New Republic. The next episode will be the second book in this trilogy, Dark Force Rising. It will be released in a couple weeks at least to whatever podcast platforms we figure out how to upload to. Spotify and Apple, probably. This will also be available on YouTube and probably most reliably on YouTube. But until then, figure out the difference between errors and mistakes, and we'll see you next time.